Lieutenant Commander Anders Lindstrom stands in the Combat Information Center of HMS Malmö, headphones pressed against his ears, listening to a low-frequency pulse, 6.2 Hz, repeating every 4 seconds. The sound matches the diesel signature of a Soviet Whiskey-class submarine creeping through Swedish territorial waters. It also matches the acoustic return from 30,000 herring, reflecting off a vertical granite wall 8 meters below the surface. Lindstrom has no computer to tell him which. He has no camera that can see through brackish Baltic water with visibility under 2 meters. He has 6 minutes before the contact exits Horsfjärden Basin into open water, and if he does nothing, and it is real, a foreign submarine will have penetrated Sweden's inner archipelago undetected. If he scrambles helicopters and it is herring, he will have committed 4 million kroner and Sweden's credibility to chasing a phantom. The sonar operator marks the contact. Bearing 042 degrees, range 3,200 meters, intermittent return. Lindstrom listens again. The pulse fades in and out as the source moves behind submerged rock formations that do not appear on any Swedish chart. HMS Malmö is a Visby-class corvette with analog passive sonar and no automated target classification, patrolling 18 kilometers of archipelago where the granite seabed rises to 8 or 12 meters below the surface. Every contact is ambiguous because the Navy has no baseline library of rock echoes to subtract from the returns. Standard procedure requires visual or photographic confirmation before declaring a submarine alert, but visibility underwater is less than 2 meters in the brackish Baltic. Lindstrom listens on manual headphones because HMS Malmö carries no computer to parse the acoustic clutter. The contact pulses again, low-frequency throb, fading into the background hiss of biologics and wave action. He cross-references the frequency against the 1981 profile from U-137, the Soviet Whiskey-class boat that ran aground on Swedish rocks 50 kilometers south. The match is close, but not exact. Herring schools also pulse at 6 to 8 Hz when their swim bladders resonate near granite faces. Lindstrom calculates the geometry. The contact is drifting southeast at roughly 2 knots. In 6 minutes, it will clear the narrow mouth of Horsfjärden Basin and enter open water, where Swedish law prohibits attacking submarines unless caught in the act of violating territorial boundaries. If it is a real Soviet boat and he waits for visual proof that will never come, it escapes undetected into Swedish coastal waters. If he calls the alert and commits helicopters, patrol boats, and depth charges to a target he cannot confirm, he burns 4 to 6 million kroner and risks his career on a sound that might be fish. Swedish sonar operators have no computer-assisted classification. Atlantic NATO forces use LOFAR spectrograms and correlation algorithms that compare live contacts against libraries of known submarine acoustics, but those systems are not available on Swedish coastal corvettes. Lindstrom and his crew rely on manual listening through analog headphones, comparing what they hear against printed frequency tables and memory of past alerts. In the deep Atlantic, that might work. In the shallow Baltic, where every granite ridge and kelp bed generates its own acoustic signature, human ears cannot reliably separate signal from noise. The Baltic is not the Atlantic. Baltic seawater is brackish, with salinity of only 0.8%, and that creates unpredictable thermoclines and acoustic ducts that bend sonar returns in ways deep ocean models do not predict. Sound rays curve downward through layers of cold freshwater runoff, then bounce off the seabed and propagate horizontally for kilometers before reflecting back to the ship. A diesel pulse that originated 3 kilometers away can return to Lindstrom's sonar sounding like it came from 6 kilometers away, or from 2 different bearings at once. Detailed seafloor maps of Sweden's inner archipelago do not exist. Existing nautical charts show depths only to 20 meters and omit thousands of submerged rock formations that clutter the sonar picture. Swedish hydrographic survey ships can map only 5 to 8 square kilometers per week using side-scan sonar, and the Stockholm archipelago covers more than 2,000 square kilometers. Without accurate bottom topology, Sonar operators cannot subtract known rock features from live contacts. Every return is potentially real, because no one knows what the baseline should look like. If Lindstrom declares a submarine alert, HMS Malmo commits helicopters, patrol boats, and depth charges to a multi-hour operation that will cost 4 to 6 million kroner, whether the target is confirmed or not. Fuel, munitions, crew overtime, and wear on airframes accrue the moment the alert goes out. There is no way to confirm the target before spending the resources, and there is no partial commitment. Swedish doctrine is all or nothing. Either the Navy prosecutes the contact with full force, or it logs the return as unclassified and moves on. If Lindstrom waits for visual confirmation, the contact will have exited the basin and crossed into international waters. Swedish law prohibits attacking submarines beyond the 12 nautical mile territorial limit, even if the boat was tracked continuously from Swedish coastal zones. Once the contact is outside that line, Sweden loses legal authority to engage, and the intruder escapes regardless of proof. The 6-minute window is not just tactical, it is legal. NATO allies dismiss Swedish alerts as Cold War paranoia unless Sweden provides photographic proof, and photographic proof is impossible in water where visibility is under 2 meters. The United States and United Kingdom have advanced sonobuoy networks and P-3 Orion aircraft with magnetic anomaly detectors, but Sweden is officially neutral and operates alone. Lindstrom has no backup, no second opinion from Allied analysts, and no diplomatic cover if the alert turns out to be false. He is operationally and politically isolated. Lindstrom makes the call. He keys the intercom and declares, "Submarine alert, bearing 042, range now 3,000 meters, intermittent diesel signature." The operations center at Bergen Naval Base acknowledges and scrambles 2 Augusta helicopters with depth charges. Lindstrom has bet his career and Sweden's credibility on a 6-second audio loop that could be herring. The clock starts. He has no automated classification, no maps, no NATO support, and no way to confirm the target before committing millions of kroner. He has only the sound in his headphones and the knowledge that if he is wrong, the next alert will be harder to justify. 2 Augusta A109 helicopters scramble from Bergen Naval Base 12 minutes after the alert. Each carries 4 M50 depth charges, 60-kilogram TNT warheads designed for deep ocean submarine warfare, with a minimum arming depth of 18 meters. The helicopters fly low over the archipelago, rotors echoing off granite cliffs, and arrive at Horsfjärden Basin 22 minutes after launch. HMS Malmo maintains sonar contact throughout the transit. Lindstrom updates the bearing, 048 degrees, range 2,800 meters. The contact is now stationary near Krokek Narrows, a choke point where the channel narrows to 300 meters between vertical rock walls. The lead helicopter drops 2 charges in a 50-meter bracket around the estimated contact position. Lindstrom watches the sonar display as the charges hit the water, then sink toward the 11-meter bottom. The hydrostatic arming vanes are designed to trigger at 18 meters of pressure. At 11 meters, the pressure is insufficient. Both charges settle into the silt without detonating, becoming inert 60-kilogram sinkers. The sonar trace shows the splashes, then the acoustic interference from the impacts, then nothing. The contact vanishes from the display 40 seconds after the drop. Contact vanishes. Lindstrom orders the sonar crew to expand the search pattern and increase gain to maximum sensitivity. The helicopters orbit overhead, burning fuel, waiting for new coordinates. 22 minutes pass. Then, the sonar operator calls out a new return. Bearing 090 degrees, range 8,200 meters, same frequency profile, on the far side of Orno Island. Lindstrom does the math. If the first contact was a real submarine, it would have had to transit 8 kilometers submerged in 20 minutes. At a diesel creep speed of 2 to 3 knots, that transit is impossible. Either Lindstrom is now tracking a second false alarm while the first was herring, or a real submarine has somehow moved faster than physics should allow. The helicopter flight leader reports fuel below 30-minute reserve and requests permission to return to Berga. Lindstrom checks HMS Malmö's fuel state. 42 hours remaining at patrol speed. But pursuing the new contact at high speed will burn that margin down to 28 hours. If the contact is real and remains stationary, it can simply wait out the Malmö, escaping when the corvette must return to port for fuel. If the contact is false, Lindstrom will have wasted 18% of his patrol endurance chasing an acoustic mirage. He has no good option. He orders the helicopters home and plots a course to the new contact at 22 knots, committing the fuel. Baltic acoustics are fundamentally different from deep ocean environments. Low salinity creates shallow thermoclines at 6 to 8 meters depth, where cold freshwater runoff from rivers meets warmer, slightly saltier water below. These thermoclines bend sound rays downward, trapping diesel pulses in a surface duct that propagates horizontally along the coast for kilometers. When those pulses encounter vertical granite walls, they reflect back toward the ship at the same frequency as the original source, but with delays of 12 to 15 seconds. To Lindstrom's analog sonar, the reflected pulse appears as a separate contact, stationary or slowly drifting 4 to 8 kilometers from the true origin. Herring schools add another layer of confusion. Baltic herring aggregate in massive schools of 30,000 to 50,000 fish during spawning season. Each fish has a swim bladder that resonates at 6 to 8 Hz when compressed by pressure waves. When a school drifts near a vertical rock face, the combined resonance of tens of thousands of swim bladders creates an acoustic mirror that reflects sound at the same frequency as a diesel submarine. On analog sonar, without spectrogram analysis, these biological returns are indistinguishable from steel hulls. Lindstrom has no way to separate fish from submarines, except by guessing based on amplitude and persistence, and both vary unpredictably with water temperature and school density. Sonar operators cannot manually subtract these biological and geological returns because no seafloor survey exists to provide a baseline. Existing nautical charts omit 80% of submerged rock features below 10 meters, meaning every contact is potentially real. Swedish hydrographic survey teams are working to map the archipelago, but at 5 to 8 square kilometers per week, completing the 2,000 square kilometer Stockholm region will take 5 years. Until then, every acoustic return that matches submarine frequencies must be investigated, because there is no database to prove it is a rock or a school of fish. The M50 depth charge was designed for deep ocean anti-submarine warfare during the Second World War. Its hydrostatic arming mechanism uses water pressure to release a spring-loaded firing pin when the charge reaches 18 meters depth. This safety feature prevents accidental surface detonations that would destroy the launching ship or aircraft. In the 11-meter fjords of the Stockholm archipelago, water pressure never reaches the threshold to trigger the arming vane. The charge sinks to the bottom, the firing pin remains locked, and the 60-kilogram TNT warhead becomes an inert sinker buried in silt. Swedish helicopters are dropping munitions that physically cannot detonate in the environment where suspected submarines operate. Modifying the arming depth to 8 or 10 meters would allow charges to detonate in shallow fjords, but creates 2 new problems. First, blast overpressure in confined channels risks damaging friendly patrol boats operating 200 to 300 meters away, because the shockwave reflects off granite walls and amplifies rather than dissipating into open ocean. Second, detonation near the rocky bottom risks triggering underwater rock slides in narrow choke points, potentially blocking future submarine access routes or trapping Swedish vessels. The Navy faces a choice: keep ineffective deep-water charges or deploy shallow-water munitions that might destroy friendly assets or reshape the battlefield unpredictably. HMS Malmö burns 180 liters of diesel per hour at 8-knot patrol speed and 520 liters per hour at 22-knot pursuit speed. Transiting from Horsfjärden to the new contact at Orno requires 90 minutes at high speed, consuming 780 liters and reducing total patrol endurance from 42 hours to 28 hours. That calculation assumes the contact remains stationary. If it creeps away at 2 knots while Malmo pursues, the intercept time stretches to 2 hours, and the fuel cost rises to over 1,000 liters. Lindström must decide whether to burn the margin now or preserve it for a return to base if Soviet surface ships appear. And he must decide without knowing whether the contact is real. If the new contact is a real submarine and it remains stationary in the shallow channel, it can employ a simple waiting strategy. A diesel boat running on batteries in silent mode can remain submerged for 24 to 36 hours, outlasting HMS Malmo's 28-hour fuel endurance. The submarine captain knows Swedish corvettes must return to port for fuel, and knows Swedish law prohibits attacks outside territorial waters. He can wait until Malmo leaves, then surface and transit to international waters unmolested. Lindström is racing toward a target that can win simply by doing nothing, and he will not know whether it is real or phantom until he arrives and finds either a submarine or empty water. Lindström orders HMS Malmo to high speed toward the Orno contact. The corvette accelerates to 22 knots, hull vibration increasing as the diesels reach full power. Crew secure loose gear and monitor fuel flow rates. The fuel state projection drops in real time. 27 hours remaining if the contact requires extended tracking. Lindström has committed the margin. If this contact is false and a real Soviet submarine appears elsewhere, or if Soviet surface ships move south from the Gulf of Finland, HMS Malmo will not have the fuel to reposition or escape without calling for a tanker, which takes 6 hours to arrive. HMS Malmo closes range. Sonar contact firms. Bearing 088 degrees. Range 4,200 meters. Intermittent returns every 6 seconds. The returns are now overlaid with biologics, likely herring schools transiting the same channel. But beneath the clutter, Lindström detects a persistent low-frequency component he cannot dismiss. It could be diesel machinery. It could be granite resonance amplified by thermocline ducts. His analog sonar cannot separate the two. He listens again, headphones pressed tight, trying to distinguish signal from noise by intuition and experience. The contact does not resolve. It remains ambiguous, pulsing in and out of the acoustic clutter. The helicopters have returned to Berga to refuel. HMS Malmo is alone with the contact for 40 minutes. No air support, no visual confirmation possible in water with 1.5-meter visibility. Lindström considers launching the ship's rigid-hull inflatable boat with divers, but Navy doctrine prohibits sending divers into water where a hostile submarine might be operating, because the submarine could surface and ram the boat or entangle divers in its propeller. Malmo has sonar, but no eyes. The contact continues pulsing, drifting slowly southeast at roughly 3 knots toward open Baltic waters. The contact continues southeast. Lindström plots the track. In 18 minutes, it will cross the 12 nautical mile territorial boundary and enter international waters, where Swedish forces lose legal authority to engage. If it is a real Soviet submarine and it reaches that line, Sweden will have documented a foreign intrusion but failed to stop it. If it is a false alarm and Lindström pursues into international waters, he risks a diplomatic incident for chasing herring outside Swedish jurisdiction. The legal boundary is not just a line on a chart. It is the edge of Lindström's operational authority, and the contact is moving steadily toward it. Lindström requests permission from Naval Command to launch illumination flares and switch to active sonar pings, tactics that would force the contact to react if it is a real submarine. Active sonar would reveal Malmo's position, but might also provoke the contact into evasive maneuvers that confirm its identity. Naval Command denies the request, citing risk of provoking a diplomatic incident if the contact turns out to be a neutral merchant vessel or a Swedish civilian craft that drifted into the search zone. Lindström is ordered to maintain passive tracking and visual standoff. He has been handed a rulebook that makes positive identification impossible. Fuel state drops to 24 hours remaining. Lindström must break off pursuit within 30 minutes or risk running tanks dry before reaching Berga, leaving HMS Malmo dead in the water if a Soviet surface threat appears. The contact remains unidentified, moving steadily toward international waters. In 30 minutes, Lindstrom must choose: abandon the contact and return to port with an unconfirmed report, or continue pursuit past the fuel margin and bet that no other threat will emerge during the return transit. There is no scenario in which he confirms the contact and preserves operational reserve. The constraints have boxed him in. In Stockholm, Swedish Defense Minister receives the preliminary reports: 2 submarine alerts in 6 hours, 0 visual confirmations, helicopters scrambled, depth charges dropped, 8 million kroner expended across both operations. Opposition parties are already preparing parliamentary questions, accusing the government of either fabricating Soviet threats for domestic political gain or demonstrating gross incompetence in coastal defense. The minister has no photograph, no physical evidence, only sonar recordings that sound like submarines to Navy analysts and like noise to everyone else. Without proof, NATO allies will dismiss Swedish claims, and domestic critics will call for resignations. Lindstrom makes the call. He orders HMS Malmö to break off pursuit and return to Berga Naval Base at economical speed. The contact continues southeast, unidentified, crossing into international waters 4 minutes later. Lindstrom files an unconfirmed contact report with naval intelligence. 2 contacts, same acoustic profile, likely linked to a single intruder, or possibly 2 separate biologics and geological anomalies. He has no proof. He has spent nearly 2 days of patrol endurance and millions of kroner. If it was a real Soviet submarine, Sweden has failed to stop a foreign intrusion into its coastal waters. If it was herring and granite, Sweden has just demonstrated to any watching adversary that its shallow water defenses cannot distinguish rock from steel. HMS Malmö returns to Berga 18 hours later. A Swedish hydrographic survey team dispatches to Croquet Narrows, where the first contact vanished after the failed depth charge drop. Divers descend to the 9-meter granite seabed and discover fresh propeller scrapings on submerged rock. 4-blade pattern, blade spacing, and pitch angle consistent with Soviet midget submarine geometry. The scrapings are recent, with no biological fouling. Physical evidence confirms that at least 1 real submarine operated in the area during the alert. Whether the Orno contact was the same boat, a second submarine, or a false alarm remains unresolved. The Swedish Submarine Defense Commission concludes in 1983 that at least 1 real intrusion occurred during the Horsfjärden incidents, but cannot determine whether additional contacts were real submarines, coordinated with the confirmed boat, or separate false alarms. The Commission's report cites systemic limitations: no automated sonar classification, no complete seafloor survey, and depth charges incapable of engaging targets in shallow water. The findings confirm what Lindstrom already knew. Swedish coastal defenses are operationally blind in their own archipelago. Swedish Navy contracts for development of new shallow water depth charges, designated M58 series, with arming depth reduced to 10 meters and reduced blast radius to minimize risk to friendly vessels and geological instability. The new charges enter service in 1985. In parallel, the Navy begins retrofitting Visby-class corvettes with digital sonar processing systems that can filter biological returns and apply basic acoustic classification algorithms, reducing but not eliminating false alarm rates. Between 1981 and 1992, Sweden declares over 6,000 submarine alerts in coastal waters. Helicopters scramble, patrol boats cordon channels, and depth charges are dropped, but confirmations remain rare. Post-Cold War analysis by the Swedish Defense Research Agency estimates that 40 to 60% of those alerts were false positives, caused by herring schools, acoustic ducts amplifying geological echoes, and unmapped seabed features. Sweden's coastal defense spent hundreds of millions of kroner chasing contacts that could not be distinguished from the environment itself. Political fallout is severe. Opposition parties force early elections in 1985, accusing the government of either manufacturing Soviet threats for domestic political gain or demonstrating gross incompetence in coastal defense. 3 Swedish defense ministers resign or are reassigned between 1982 and 1988. unable to provide the photographic proof Parliament demands, or to explain why millions of kroner are spent on contacts that vanish without confirmation. The submarine alerts become a domestic political crisis that outlasts the incidents themselves. NATO member states privately questioned Swedish claims throughout the decade. Without photographic evidence or recovered debris, US and UK naval intelligence analysts attribute many alerts to acoustic anomalies rather than Soviet intrusions. Sweden remains officially neutral, but the submarine incidents accelerate quiet intelligence sharing agreements with US and British forces in the Baltic. Swedish sonar recordings and hydrographic data are exchanged for NATO acoustic libraries and classification algorithms, an informal alliance built on shared technical problems rather than treaty obligations. Post-Soviet archival research and interviews with Russian submarine veterans confirm that at least a dozen successful intrusions into Swedish waters occurred during the 1980s. Missions conducted by Soviet naval Spetsnaz and midget submarine units. Russian planners deliberately exploited known Swedish sonar limitations, shallow water acoustic clutter, and the legal constraints that prevented Swedish forces from attacking outside territorial waters. The ghost submarines were real, and they knew exactly where the Swedish defenses were blind. Sweden joins NATO in 2024, ending 2 centuries of official neutrality. In official statements, Swedish government officials cite the 1980s submarine incidents as formative proof that neutrality is operationally untenable when adversaries can penetrate territorial waters with impunity and leave defenders unable to prove it happened. The ghost submarines that Lindström and thousands of other operators chased through the archipelago shaped Sweden's strategic calculus for 4 decades. The lesson was not that the alerts were false. It was that Sweden could not defend its waters alone. Lieutenant Commander Anders Lindström, now retired, reflects on the Harsvarden alert in a 2003 interview. He describes the 6-minute decision window, the ambiguous sonar return, and the knowledge that whether he acted or waited, the outcome would be failure if the contact was real, and embarrassment if it was false. He does not call the alerts mistakes. He calls them the inevitable result of analog tools, unmapped terrain, and shallow water physics that made rock and steel indistinguishable. The Swedish Navy was not incompetent. It was overmatched by the environment. The original M50 depth charges, the weapons that could not arm in Swedish fjords, are now displayed in Swedish naval museums as artifacts of a Cold War conducted in the wrong environment with the wrong tools. They sit beside salvage propeller scrapings and sonar printouts, physical evidence of a decade when Sweden's defenses chased contacts they could not see, confirm, or destroy. The exhibits do not frame the alerts as failures. They frame them as engineering problems that had no solution with the technology available at the time. Modern Swedish coastal defense relies on digital sonar processing, automated classification algorithms trained on decades of archived contacts, and complete high-resolution seafloor maps generated by autonomous underwater survey vehicles. The acoustic libraries that Lindström lacked in 1982 now contain signatures for every common biological and geological feature in Swedish waters, allowing operators to subtract known clutter before classifying contacts. The technology solved the problem that doctrine and training could not. The 40 to 60% false alarm rate from the 1980 submarine alerts became a case study in sensor limitations and decision-making under uncertainty. Swedish Defense Research Agency publications from the 1990s analyze the Harsvarden and similar incidents as examples of how capable operators equipped with inadequate tools will generate systematically unreliable data. The lesson was not to trust operators more or less, but to recognize when the problem is the sensor, not the human. Baltic herring still school in the Stockholm archipelago every spring, aggregating by the tens of thousands near the same granite walls where Soviet submarines once crept. Their swim bladders still resonate at 6 to 8 Hz when compressed by wave action and current. Modern Swedish sonar systems filter those returns automatically, subtracting biological signatures before operators ever see the display. The herring remain, but they no longer masquerade as submarines. In his 2003 interview, Lindström was asked whether he would have made the same decision if he could repeat the Horsfarten alert with full knowledge of the outcome. He paused, then said that the decision was not about the outcome. It was about the information available in the 6 minutes he had to decide. And that information was identical, whether the contact was real or false. The question, he said, was not whether he should have acted differently. It was whether Sweden should have sent him to sea with tools that made the right answer impossible to find. That question, Lindström noted, took Sweden 40 years and a NATO membership to answer.